How y'all doing today? How y'all doing today? Huh? Okay. Good? Okay.
My hand's feeling something.
Okay. But everybody's pretty good? Okay. All right.
We played it last week.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll start off tonight. I've got something prepared, but I also wanted to start this way in case we wanted to do this. Did anybody have anything from the movie this past Friday night?
You went to Christians.
It was sad when they burned the people to death. Oh yeah, that was. Why did they do that?
Good question. That's called Christian persecution. They
Yeah,
burned him
but why-
because he was a Christian.
But why? Like, why would they do that just because he was a Christian?
Because it was against the law.
Because Nero, who was the emperor or the president or the king or whatever you want to call him of Rome at that time, was extremely evil, and he hated Christians. And during that time, he had people set the city of Rome on fire. It burned down a lot of homes and a lot of things in Rome. He really hurt a lot of people, and he did it, and then he blamed Christians for doing it, and therefore justified his ability to burn Christians and to put them to death and all that kind of stuff. So, yes.
Wasn't the main religion at that time Islam?
No. Islam was not even a religion.
So that tells you it's not
Wait.
Muhammad did not create Islam until, I believe it was in the 400s. I believe, ain't that when Muhammad was
Somewhere around there.
bringing around his. Now there would have.
Kathy's on her way.
Okay, how far out is she?
She said we're running off.
Okay, all right.
Was
We're-
it after the Byzantine Empire?
Huh?
Was it after or before the Byzantine Empire?
That was
before.
the Byzantine.
Because
Is that correct? Yeah. Byzantine would have been, would that have been, wait a minute, hold on, the Byzantine Empire would have been way before, wouldn't it? That would have been, wouldn't that have been Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar and Darius and Cyrus and all of the Medes and Persians and that kind of stuff?
We're learning about Justinian and.
All right, well then never mind, no. Then that would have been after the Byzantine would have been the time period that would have had a Constantine. And yeah, okay, so that would have been later, a little bit
We
later.
learned in class that once the Byzantine Empire got overthrown,
It was overthrown
Islam.
by the Ottoman Empire. I believe.
yes, and then Islam became the main religion, and they
Because-
started major churches and stuff like that in Islam.
Yes, Ottoman Empire was basically the Turkish, the people of Turkey who were Muslims, followers of
Because
Muhammad.
there was a main church.
Any other thoughts or questions or anything as far as the movie is concerned? Don't?
Okay, so I had a little misunderstanding about, who is Paul, about his reasoning for him, because what I thought I heard is that he hated Christians and then he became one.
So, the life of Paul is what you would be actually discussing. He was in jail because he was a Christian. But Paul, if you will go to Acts, and then there's some other accounts, but in Acts we learn that Paul was Saul. That was his name. And if you look at the significance of the difference between the name of Saul and the name of Paul, is that the name Saul meant big and important. That was what that name meant. The name Paul means that I am insignificant, I am little, I am not important. That was, although that was his name, it would have been his Hebrew name and then his Greek name, because a lot of people during that time period would have had names that were traditional to their country or their language or their heritage, but they also had names that went along with the Greek or the Roman, because the Greek Empire and then the Roman Empire followed. So he became Paul, though as Saul, that's what he done. He was a Pharisee, and sometimes people get the wrong impression. They think that Saul was just this mean ruffian outlaw dude. He was not. He was a devout religious Jew. He firmly believed that everything that he was doing was absolutely what God would have him to do. He believed that, but he was wrong. But he was sincere in his belief in that. The road to Damascus, where he got life, that's where Jesus actually come and told him, said, you quit persecuting me, you fix the work. And from that point, now, up to that point, he literally killed, you know, at the end of the movie, where he's greeted by the people, especially the little girl, and I didn't know a lot, it's hard for me to even talk about that. These were the people, and this is, I want you to think about the reality of this. This is the reality. Paul, or Saul, sought down and beat and killed those people because the Christians, because they were Christians. That's the reason he done it. And he ruthlessly done it to the people. He killed them. And what you were seeing there, and although this was some liberties, but it was the truth in the fact that he would have killed men, women, and children in the pursuit of Judaism. And one of the things that was the thorn in the side for Paul, I mean, there was health issues, but there was also the fact that Paul then lived the remainder of his life. The next 30 years, Paul had to realize and remember and think about the fact that he killed innocent people, that he took their lives for loving Jesus, for the thing that he did. He killed people. And I can promise you, as a human being, that was hard. That was tough on him. That caused him grief, and that caused him sorrow. And it probably caused him to wonder, you know, am I really good enough? You know, but he's not. And that's the blessing, is that we're not good enough, but that's what he had to deal with. So that was the significance of the film there, of that when he died, then all of a sudden those very ones that he had put to death, they're there in the meeting. That's, for me, that's powerful, but it's true. And that would be the case.
I might have missed this, but, so, why
Because the Pharisees, Judaism, believed that they were committing heresy, that they
didn't believe in Jesus.
They didn't believe in Jesus. They didn't think Jesus was the Messiah,
Right.
which is the very thing that the Jews had been looking for. But they didn't believe that he was, and because they didn't believe he was, therefore, that was a crime punishable by death under Judaism, and it was. So that's why they. Yeah. Anybody guess what?
Okay, I'm just not thinking about this, but you know how like the 12 apostles and all that, how come like all of the beings are like just all boys, like not, doesn't have to like any girls like that?
A girl? Yes and no. Now, there was not a girl that was one of the apostles, but Mary Magdalene was a very close follower of Christ, and she was very significant in ministry for him. There was Mary and Martha as well. There were things like that. But when it comes to those kind of things, you have to read your Bible and understand that as men and women and children, we do have roles that God puts us, that gives us. And we have things that we are supposed to do, things we're not supposed to do, and places that roles that we are to fill. And in the leadership, in the outspoken leadership of the church and of those things, that falls on the man for responding to responsibility. But that does not lessen the impact of women, their roles and what they do within the church and within the Christian world and in the family. You got to, a lot of times the world will have you think that Christianity puts women and children down. When in fact, it's not that anybody being put down, it's that each person has a particular role and a type of role to fill. And that's what that is. But there are women, significant women all throughout the Bible. And one was even the judge of Israel. She was very important. No. Miriam? Yeah. Now, anything else on the movie or Paul or any of that stuff? Anybody?
So why did he, the other guy, get off on Jacob? Jacob or Luke?
Luke.
Luke? Yeah. Because he was a Greek and he was breaking into a prison and he was doing something. By
Got
law,
caught right in-
yeah, by law, you could not write down anything and take it out of a prison in Rome. So that's why they throw it in. Movie. I mean, like I said, there are some liberties in the movie. You got to understand that. It's not all straight from the Bible. You have to fill in gaps and stuff. But just for me, they did a very good job of filling those gaps in without taking away from what the Bible about that is.
The king of that city, not Nemo, but the one that looked at all that interaction, was it Nemo?
Talking about the prefect of the prison, the head of the prison. We don't even know anything about it. That's part of what is
That's just part of the.
part of the writing. Well, he existed, we just don't know anything about him because the Bible don't actually tell us about him. There would have been a prefect of the Mamertine prison. The Mamertine prison is a very real place, and it is where Paul was in prison, and during his last in prison. So there would have been some type of interaction between the prefect and Paul. And it would be very possible, and possibly even likely, that Paul or Luke, either way, would have led him to Christ, just because that's the significance of the story of Christ. As we know that from writings by church fathers and things like that, that John, when they come and arrested John the last time, before taking him to Rome and loading him in oil and then sending him to the Patmos, that he actually, according to the church fathers, it's not out of the Bible, but rather in the writings of those of the day, that basically every guard that picked him up, that arrested him there at Ephesus and took him to Rome, basically every one of them was converted to Christianity from the preaching of John. But you have to understand, to actually have heard the words of Paul and Peter and John, the apostles, they were anointed in a way that their words was so convinced and gripping people. So, many people turn just from hearing them speak. So, it would be very likely, very possible that that would be the case. Anybody else? Anything else from the movie or concerning Paul?
How much older was Paul? I don't think it was.
That was nice. I'm sure Paul was older. And Paul would have been somewhere probably near 70 years old, around 70 when he died.
That's pretty young back then, right?
Nothing back during that time. That was, basically,
People used to be following.
It was after.
all of history, all of the world's history, minus the flood. I mean, the pre-Diluvian folks lived a long time. Then, immediately following the flood, Noah was the last one to live a long time. He lived through the flood.
What do you like?
And then they immediately began to fall off. And even during the time of Moses, Moses penned that the life expectancy of a human being was 70 years. That's in Psalms. That's one of the Psalms that he wrote. He said, so for the majority of the history of the world, man has expected to 70s. You're an old man.
How long would it be the beginning of time itself?
What was it? 2,100 years, something like that. Wait, hold on, no. 2 hours of the flood. Somewhere along now. I got it, we did it in the study, and I've got it written down. I think it's around 2,000 years before, then we had about 2,000 years after, and then we had about 2,000 years since.
So Jesus was like,
Time-wise, you kind of had the same time block there.
Wait, for Jesus was here 2,000 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound so wrong. Like it's 2021. I know it's a long time, but like 20 is a big number. When you put just 2 there, it's not a big number, so it doesn't make it sound like a long time.
so 1,000 will be on, right?
No. All right, yes, sir.
Wasn't Noah like 900 something?
Noah, I think Noah lived to be about 850. Guess we'll have to review all of that again. All right, anything else from the movie? Anybody? If not, we'll jump on into this. All right. A couple weeks ago, we looked at Jonah, chapter 1. Yeah, and the well. We looked at the well too. And Jonah. And the well.
Do you think the well was sent by God? Or do you think it was already alive?
Well, I think it already alive, but it was definitely sent by God.
Now,
It was pretty good.
Yeah, and it was described, it's a great fish. We don't even know exactly what it was. We just know that it swam in the water, it was really big, and it swallowed Jonah. We know those
How
things.
big was it?
Don't tell us that. All right. All right. We're going to start with the last verse of chapter 1 that said, now the Lord, this is Jonah 1:17. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. That's where we ended the last time. Now, the fish and Jonah being swallowed by it, that is the result of Jonah's recognized sin. All right? In the first chapter, what we know is that when we went through it, we learned that Jonah eventually recognized that God was punishing all of them because of his sin, right? So we know he ran away from God because, and therefore the storm and everything was because of his sin. So he recognized his sin. You understand what I'm talking about? He recognized what I've done is sin. Now, even though we recognize sin and we stop sin, does that mean that we don't have to pay the consequences, or do we still have to? I mean, even if we straighten everything up, are we still responsible for the sin that we've committed in our life? Absolutely, yes we are. We're still responsible for that sin. So, even though Jonah recognized his sin, the fact that he got thrown off a boat and swallowed by a great fish is because of his sin. Now, let's look then into Jonah chapter 2. I'll read through it real quick. It's not a long one. All right, Jonah chapter 2, verse 1. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardest my voice. For thou hast cast me into the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight, yet I will look again toward thy holy temple. The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me around about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was above me, or about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. And my prayer came in unto me into thine holy temple. They that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. All right. Let's get right on into this. And I know last time I took it too long, and it was just I went too long, but I tried to get through it. Fortunately, we can actually get through this one pretty quick. It's a short one. It's pretty much to the point. What we'll look at here first in verse 1 is the fact that it says in verse 1, then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly. Jonah broke out the most powerful weapon in the world. What is that? Prayer. The weapon. Prayer is the most powerful weapon in the world. Now, where did he break this weapon out at? In the belly of a whale. You know,
I bet he was hungry. Did he have to drink like a whale?
That is not how the anatomy of
What'd you say?
Hold on. Well, let me go ahead and tell you. The anatomy of a whale didn't work anyway. This is something God done. But I don't think he drank anything during that time. Now, he probably sloshing around in some nastiness and that kind of stuff, and who knows what he accidentally swallowed. But anyway, he's in the belly of a whale.
12 guts.
But what is he doing in that belly of that whale?
Praying.
He's praying.
So that's like us being in fights and you're just looking constantly praying.
Yeah, in a sense, kind of, yeah, in a way. Oh, no, I mean, in a way, yeah.
So
No, yeah,
that
I should
whale's
say.
like doing 360s and all.
No, probably not. But anyways,
Yeah.
the thing to keep in mind in verse 1 there is that he's praying.
Cease has a question.
Okay. Yes. You go ahead, buddy. You can ask.
How
How
does God survive?
did he survive? We're going to get into that. Listen up. Actually, I'll answer you that right now. There was only one way that Jonah was able to survive, and that was God wanted him to survive. God said, "You're not going to die. I want you to live through this," and that's the way he lived. Otherwise, he couldn't have lived. Nobody could live in the belly of a fish. You would die. You couldn't live. I mean, it just if you're not. I mean, yeah. But there's so many things working against you naturally that you couldn't live. It takes a miracle of God for you to live. So that was verse 1. So the significance of verse 1 is the thing that we meet. This should be the significance of all of our lives as Christians, and that's prayer. No matter what the situation, pray. Always pray. All right, verses 2 through 6 all go together. This is his prayer, or at least it's part of his prayer. But I'm going to read back through it real quick. And said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord. I cried out to you, Lord, because I'm in a bad spot. And you heard me. Out of the belly of hell is the way he described it, because that's what it would be like. It was literally that he was in the grips of death. And out of the belly of hell cried I, and you heard me. God, even though I'm in the belly of a whale, down in the bottom of the ocean, you hear me. It kind of reminds me of back of what was her name? Sarah's handmaiden that is the mother of Ishmael. I can't even think of her name right now. That Abraham took.
Hagar. Hagar.
Hagar. Where Hagar says in the wilderness when she's about to die with that baby, and God speaks to her, and then she goes, "You see me." She realized. I mean, think about this. Y'all realize this. God sees me. Each individual, he sees me. He hears me. That goes for all of us. That's amazing. And he knows everything that we need. And he knows all this. And even in the worst place you've ever been, like Jonah, God still hears us. God still sees us. Yes.
How did Jonah breathe?
We'll get back to that.
Cease just asked the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. And we'll get back to that. Hold on. We'll get back to that. No, you can figure all you want. The answer is God, and that is Him. But we'll talk about that more. Let's get through this right here. For thou hast heard me in verse 3, or hast cast me into the deep in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. In other words, all the oceans above me. Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight. He says in his mind, listen, and here's what I want you to understand. I don't think his heart softened up right after this happened. I believe that by reading this, I believe Jonah stayed pretty steady with his hard-heartedness. And I think that was part of that lesson, because I think he has decided that because of what he done, the Lord will not hear me ever again. Because the truth is Jonah, he fled from God. He said, I resign from you. I'm not doing your work no more. All right, and so then he's in this belly of this whale. And I think at first, for the first day or two, he's going, he ain't going to hear me. He ain't going to listen to me no more. I'm done. I'm settled. He's going to make me suffer. And he's sitting in there. He's got the boats and the paddles. And that's what he's got. He's mad. He's upset. He's just all these things. That's what he's doing. And he's saying these things. He said, all of this is over. I am cast out of thy sight. But then he goes, you know what? Eventually there comes a moment. Heart softens back up. He realizes, not only is God in control, he got me in the belly of the whale, he also is just and he's loving and he's got every right in the world to put me here. And you know what? He can still hear me. And he starts to understand that. I will look again toward thy holy temple. the significance of that is that back in that day, after they built the temple, the Jews, anytime that they was dispersed, anytime they were away from Jerusalem, when they prayed, they would turn, whichever direction it was where they were at, they would turn and face the direction toward Jerusalem to face the temple, because it was significant. It was God's house. It was where God dwelt between the cherubims on the mercy seat, and they faced that way. So that's what Jonah said. So Jonah's down in the belly of the whale in the middle of nowhere, don't know where he's at, don't know up, down, sideways, whatever. But in his mind, and in his heart, he says, I'm going to face the holy city. I'm going to face Jerusalem, and I'm going to pray. Even though I deserve to be here, I'm going to do this. That's what he said. That's what I'm going to do. Verse 5. The waters compassed me about, even to the soul, or in other words, he was desperate, and it was just all over. The depth closed me round about, the weeds were wrapped about my head. He is in the bottom of the bottom, the worst of the worst. It's all horrid and awful and terrible, and you got stomach contents all that he's swimming in, and he just nastiness. There's stuff wrapped all over him. He just, it's terrible. He's in a horrible place. Verse 6 says, I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. In other words, he knows I went to the very lowest low in the world. He'd be like the fish swimmer in Mariana Trench. Just all the way down. He's in the bottom of the earth. He's in the lowest place. Spiritually wise also. Physically he was, but spiritually he had hit the very rock bottom. That's where he was at. The earth with her bars was about me forever, yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption. Oh, listen to this. Oh, Lord my God. He still realizes. He knows. He's still my Lord. He's still my Jehovah. He's still my all, my everything. He still has control. He's still my ruler. He's still whatever you want to be. That's what the prayer was. He run from God. He had been hardened. He had hardened himself to God. He tied him in a note for a little while in that belly. Probably was scared to death at first, but then after the scared to death part, when he wasn't dying, he realized, now I'm going to get below his knees. I'm going to pout a little while. He did that for a little while. But then he finally softened up, and he knows God still hears him. And whatever he does, it's just, it's right, it's love. So anytime, it's what you need to get from this. Anytime that you turn away from God, and we all do, it happens sometimes. Sometimes we get away from God. But anytime you do, you can always return to God. Jonah could, always can. You can return to God. He prayed with conviction and knowledge right there. And when I say knowledge, not just knowledge of what God would do, but from knowledge of a godly life. He's quoting things from the Psalms and things like that, so we know that Jonah was very well read and understood the Bible as he had at that time. So he prayed with that conviction and that knowledge of who God was and what God is. We have more knowledge than he had the ability to have outside of godly revelation. So we got even more here. He knew God would hear, and he knew God would deliver it his own way. Whatever that delivery was. Now, Jonah didn't know when he's in this belly. He didn't know if God was going to let him just suffer and eventually die in there. He didn't know if the thing was going to, fill up and he would drown. He didn't know. He didn't know if he was going to get spit out on a deserted island somewhere and, spend the remainder of his life alone and lonely on some deserted island. He didn't know what was going to happen. But he did know, he did understand that he was going to be delivered in God's way. How God chose. Let's look at verse 7. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came in unto thee into thine holy temple. That is just more proof of that hard-heartedness that followed on in for a couple of days. Because it says, when my soul fainted within me, when I finally gave up my front, gave up my hardness, gave up whatever, and I gave in to you, at this point, that's when Jonah was able to remember who God was, that he was the Lord, that he was his Jehovah, that he was his everything. That's when he figured it out. That's when Jonah realized. And that's when Jonah began to pray. Jonah didn't begin praying when he first got water by the well. Jonah began praying when his heart softened and he realized that remembrance came back to him. That God still listens. Remember that first part was about, that he's recognized now, not only a sin, but now he's recognized who God is and the realities of God and where he's at and what he needs. So let's go on to verse 8. Verse 8 says this: they that observe lying vanities forsake their own mercy. That means this: when we let pride and ignorance and those kind of things stand between us and God, when we put anything between us and God, that would be our vanities, or which is lying vanities, because nothing is greater than God. So, but when we let these things come between us and God, we forsake our own mercies. In other words, we exclude or deny ourselves from God's mercy. When we don't put God first, we are removing ourselves. It's like taking ourselves off the team. Okay, I'm on the team, but I say I'm no longer on this team. I'm stepping out. So you are excluding yourself from your team and from the benefits of being on that team. You step out of it. You just excluded yourself from the mercies of God. His mercy is the only reason we're even alive. God's mercy, His unmerited grace, is why we're even alive. So when we put those things between us and God, and we exclude, we deny ourselves His mercy. See, if Jonah, if he had went to Nineveh first, if he had went straight to Nineveh, you know what? He would have got swallowed by a great fish. That's mercy. See, that's mercy. He excluded himself from the mercy of the torment and the suffering of being swallowed by a big old fish.
I bet he
By not going to Nineveh. Had he went to Nineveh first? But if he would have, he would have had the mercy of God to have not been swallowed by that little fish. You know what else? Had he prayed for forgiveness sooner, he wouldn't have to spend 3 days in that fishing bed.
I bet he didn't know that.
Do I?
I bet he didn't know that.
I bet it was all night to him. But you know what? He wouldn't have. All he had to do was ask for forgiveness. Honestly and sincerely ask for forgiveness, and he would have gotten the mercy of God. He would not have excluded himself. He would not have forsaken his own mercy had he just done the will of God. If we just do what God asks us, and if we live our lives for God, if we let God be first in our lives, we receive all these mercies. Verse 9. But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Now, this is how prayer should be. Remember back in Daniel 6 and 10, where it told us, Daniel went and prayed anyway. The decree had been made, you can't pray anymore. You'll be put in the lion's den and die if you pray. And what did Daniel do? And how?
The same way.
No, the same way. He just do it. Yeah, he prayed just like he always did. As if nothing was any different. But what else did he do when he prayed? He always gave thanks. So he gave thanks even when things were bad. Well, listen to this. But I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Jonah, who's in about as bad a spot as a man can be in, I mean, that's got to be a pretty bad place to be. When he begins to pray, he begins to give thanks as well. That's what prayer does to us. God gives us that calm and that peace. He allows us to recognize the goodness of God. And allows us to recognize the good in our lives, even when things seem hopeless. It's at those times that we need to be thankful. Because there actually always is something to be thankful about. Even Jonah had something to be thankful about. What do you have to be thankful about? Right there. All right. What else? That God still spoke to him. That he didn't cut him off.
The relationship.
Yeah. And what if he didn't spit him out? What if he had to suffer long and die in that well? Would he have still had something to be thankful about? What?
That he got the chance to talk to
Yeah. Yeah. Because he was still going to heaven. Those are all good things. There's always something to be thankful for. And then it ends with, there in verse 9, salvation is of the Lord. We look all over the place. Most of us do. In this case, Jonah was looking for Tarshish. As far away as he could get in the known world from where he was supposed to be. That's what he was looking for. He's looking for salvation outside of the Lord. There is no salvation outside of the Lord. It's the only place we can find. The only place. Then he began to realize these things. He began to pray. When he began to pray, and then he went into praying and asking forgiveness, he went into thanking the Lord. He became thankful. He became, thank you, Lord. Verse 10. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. What is this? So we know we started with recognition, right? It was recognition. Right? What did he recognize? Okay. And what was the result of his recognition of that sin? It did, but what else did it do? No, not recognition. We started here in recognition tonight. He recognized the sin, and it did calm the storm for those other ones. But what it began, well, no, their recognition began his payment for his sin. It didn't forgive him of nothing. Just because he recognized it, he didn't. Remember, he was still hard-hearted, still wasn't praying, still doing all that stuff. But he did recognize. It wasn't until repentance come around. What happened when you repented? His prayers was answered. And not just answered, but it answered in a way that we physically and fleshly would want it to be answered. We want to keep living. And it allowed him to keep living. Now, God allowed him to keep living because God had given him a job to do. And now that he had repented, he was going to give him that opportunity to do the job he was supposed to do in the first place. Nope. Just know he got spit out on the dry land, and I can promise you this. Old Jonah probably got swam up, and you spit him up there, and he probably cleaned up a little bit, got all that stomach juice off of him. And then I bet you money that son of a gun made straight forward in him. Because he didn't want to get swallowed by a dragon or something like that next, because he was taking a roundabout route. I bet you he went straight. Repentance, the result of repentance was answered prayer. See, that's what happens to us. And here's what I want you to see so far. We've looked at the story of Daniel and the lion's den, and we've looked at Jonah now, right? Jonah in the well. What is the common thread between these two stories? Do what God tells you, but what is the common thread for them? Prayer. Daniel prayed. Jonah prayed. Now you're right. No, you're right. But the common thread that kind of threads them together is prayer. The events that brings the two events together is prayer. That's the thing you need to understand, is that single most powerful weapon prayer. It's what we always need to do. It's what gets us through. It's what got all these folks through. We just, and you know what? That weapon becomes more powerful the more we practice. The more we pray, the more sincere and earnest we get about it, the more devoted we are to prayer, the more powerful prayer becomes for us. So I encourage you to pray. Practice it more. All right. Any questions about tonight's stuff? What was that one question a while ago that we didn't answer?
We did in the.
How usually enters
How do you breathe?
Oh, how you breathe. Miracle again. Yeah, because you can't breathe in a fish's belly otherwise. It ain't like on, which one was it? Phineas and Ferb. You don't actually get to live inside of a whale on Nights and Comedy.
Yes, there's couches set up in there.
Yeah, there's not. All right, yes, ma'am.
It's full.
Huh? He did. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He was fasting.
I'm surprised that he didn't even
I was already in the belly.
I really doubt he ever even thought about the fact that he was
You get,
I don't think you'd get hungry in that situation myself. I believe. Yeah. You probably look like that. The thing is it probably wouldn't even cross your mind. I'm thinking you're thinking about a whole lot of other things than food and drink. So. Anybody? Yeah.
for a
Most people.
while, but
Yeah, that would, I believe, well, and see, that's actually a really good point there, Brendan, is that you know, I think the first couple of days, that's exactly what John was doing. First day or so, John was thinking about, well, am I going to die? That was his concern. Fear was probably the first thing, and his fear of death. And all of us will have a fear of death in the sense of we don't really want to die. We certainly don't want to die a terrible death. You know, even though we know, just like watching the movie the other night, that we can be at peace with our death. That it's not a bad thing, although we don't want to cross that threshold where Sister Freddie Whitehead used to say, we don't want to step over that broomstick. But the truth is if we're saved, if we're Christians, if we love God, we don't have to fear. We don't have to fear what's to come. You know, we may not like what, the thought of it or whatever, but to understand that we don't have to fear. And if we're living it like we should, we do it like Paul did. We walk on out there and you go ahead and go.
Y'all not ever, meet the man who was on the boat with him?
Do you ever meet him again?
Yeah.
No, don't say it. Probably not.
Like, when you're saying, if John was just from the Twitter went straight to sources, then he would never win the world, but you could still say that was kind of God's plan, but then you do that, but you still get to say those three men.
Okay. And that's a good point, because you can look at it like this. You know, this is where some of that predestination, free will, election, all of that stuff comes back into play. And one night we're going to, at some point we'll look at some of that stuff. God knows everything. We know that. We know He knew what's going to happen. Here's the thing. As people, we do have the opportunity, the option of choosing what we will do or believe or say and those kind of things. So, you got to understand in this sense is that although that was not the task he was given, and although he neglected his own mercy from God by not doing what God told him to do, once that path changed, because he went the wrong way, it was an opportunity for other people to get to see God, although they didn't probably get to see God as they should have. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that those men didn't come to know God and follow God. I'm just saying that what they saw was a man that was supposed to be a man of God, not doing what God said. So, even though, yeah, there's an opportunity possibly that there was some witnessing going on there, it wasn't done in the way it should have been done, but that was because of the decisions that John made. But you're right. I mean, even still, there's opportunity. So, yeah. Anybody else? Anybody? Anything at all? Whatever. All right, we'll probably do some more studying in Jonah. There's only 2 more short chapters in it, but we'll see. Let me ask this. Anybody have a Bible story that they would like for us to look at next? So we can start looking into some stuff. Anybody? Anybody at all?
We could look at Jesus and how he fed all the people.
I want to read the Jesus story.
Yeah, me too.
Christmas is coming. Y'all can do that for this.
Yeah.
We do have
It always says that you That's a family. Samson.
Yeah, and that's also big stuff.
Samson.
Samson?
Yeah.
I'm not looking at Samson. We'll see. All right, we have some ideas thrown out there, so we'll look and see what we've got. Boys, y'all jump on back up. We ain't done. All right, no more questions concerning Jonah? Anybody?
She has a question.
Oh, yes.
Is there a chapter about
Mermaids? Not mermaids specifically, but we do know, remember, mostly from Job, that there are sea monsters or creatures, so,
What about dinosaurs?
but now there are no such thing as mermaids in the sense that you would know, as in people that are half fish.
Let's
No.
talk about unicorns.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
There are no people that are half fish in that place.
Wasn't it unicorn?
A unicorn was a strong animal, beast of burden.
Do not like Lucky Charms.
Probably not like what you've seen in a movie that you've
there's a time.
been. He would have been a very strong, and apparently he was he was a lot more kin to the mule than he was the horse, is what it seems like to me. Yeah, go out there and try to reason with a mule. It's about like trying to reason with a goat. Yeah, that's a very good point.
You'll always lose.
All right. Anybody else? Anything else? What? I can't hear you. You have to speak up.
Don't. We.
All right. Anybody else? Anything else? Remember?
Well,
No outside conversation. Okay. So, are we done? No more questions, right?
No, start with this side. No.
Huh?
Start with this side.
Okay. You go ahead.
My daddy and daddy knows
Oh, that. Yes, ma'am.
Miss Brown. I think she's leaving our school. I think she's leaving our school.
Is any Miss?
Brittany Brown.
She a teacher
She's an art teacher.
at the high school? And she's leaving? Is that what you wanted to?
Somebody, I'm pretty sure it's our Oxford or
Yeah. Don't tell things unless you know.
Yeah, so everybody's fine.
That don't mean that.
She said.
But we will remember Miss Brittany Brown. All right.
Uncle Josh talked about it.
Yes, sir, Mr. Cease.
my family.
Huh?
My
Your
family.
family, absolutely. Always pray for your family, ain't that right? Yes, sir.
I shocked you with persecuted Christians and my grandma.
Awesome. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm just going to get it.
I got you, brother. Yes, sir.
My mom, she knows me from
Gotcha. Yes, sir.
me and Paul.
They run off and left us, didn't they? You said he left. And They slipped out this time. They actually got it over on a bunch of
Let's
the
get
trees.
him right.
Coming up from North Georgia in the mountains.
Are you serious?
You live by it.
Yeah, they whispered out.
They cheated.
They left without us.
They're on a scouting mission for your trip.
I bet.
I
No,
bet.
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
not. That's not what we're told.
Huh? They're actually where we're going.
Oh.
Okay. We're going someplace
Yeah,
where you
go
find
ahead.
out.
Well, Monty, they won't want to wait again.
Yeah, they're probably too weak right now to run away. I've seen them the other day.
Lola's on a handle collar right now.
Oh, yeah. Lola, look, I thought she was about to
She
die.
looks like the Jews from Hitler times.
She
She's
did.
on 3 feet.
Actually, no. She's not very good.
What about Richard?
Oh yeah, play for Mama too.
All right, hold up on the conversation, please.
She's
Yes.
talking about.
Anyone that has to play defense on Facebook.
Oh. All right, there any more prayer requests?
Keon's got quite a few heart tests tomorrow.
Okay. Y'all remember Miss Kim, please?
Rush is back in hospital. What happened to Rush?
What's he back?
Cancer? I know.
When did he go back in?
Today.
What was the?
Well, I think he's gonna do, they said he's gonna do chemo. But as she put it, the bad food stuff, so I'm assuming it would be the chemo, that, because I don't think his numbers.
So we go back down again. Yeah, this, yeah.
That's my lady. Something's wrong with her leg, but she hasn't been to school in a while.
Who was it? Laney?
I don't know the last name.
That's okay. His name?
His legs. She's getting her surgery soon. I know she's leaving school soon and not coming back until the end of January.
Which Miss is?
Donna.
Miss Donna? Oh, she's having another surgery?
She'll have several more,
Okay.
just because it's on her concept.
I see. Okay. All right, anybody else?
No resolution.
Absolutely.
Remember Richard too?
Yeah, I was fixing to give a little update what I had. He sent me a text a little while ago. I guess, JB's improving his daddy. And possibly will get to come home, I think, tomorrow maybe. One of the young ones, which one was it? Colin? Yeah. After that virus that he had, apparently his blood count was, just bottomed out. You know, it appeared he can't, but it looks like it is a result of that bad virus that he had, and that if he begins to respond to the treatment, and they can raise those numbers by about 10,000. And here's the thing, his numbers are supposed to be 190,000, he was at 8,000. So they said if he can start to, respond with the medication and increase at least by 10,000 count, they'll probably let him come home and his treatment or whatever, medicine and all. So y'all do remember them too. And just remember Richard and the family. It's just been one thing after another for a while now. They could use a reprieve. So y'all do, make sure y'all pray for them. Keep them certainly in your thoughts and prayers. For sure. All right, anybody else? Good?
Lewis will start a community chemo on Monday, he'll be going to Dothan.
Lewis?
Yeah, he'll start going to Dothan instead of Tacoma.
Oh, okay.
And he will, so he actually had last week and this week off for chemo, so he was fishing today.
How's he?
Right now, he's doing, pretty good. He actually ate some chicken noodle soup and drank some tea, so. Just a little bit, not much, but, yeah, he said he feels like it has shrunk some, he can tell, because he got a few of the noodles down. So he's actually doing, better. I mean, he still can't do a lot, but he
But
did
still.
go fish again today, so.
Yeah, and that's, that's good medicine right there. That's real good medicine, just to be at that he can fish, it's, no doubt about
But
that.
he'll have a new doctor and everything one day.
Okay. But it'll be closer to home, and that's good.
The driving was making me sick.
Absolutely, that's a long ride.
No, the VA is really hard to deal with.
Yes.
So it's taking.
They're slow, is what they are. They're fairly easy to deal with, they're very
Yeah.
slow.
So it's taken this long to get his VA doctor, so he actually has Humana, but they only pay 80%.
Right.
So he's been going to principal anyways, and we'll just have to pay the 20% out of it, which is,
Gonna
one
be
treatment
significant.
is $20,000 per treatment.
Y'all continue to remember Lewis and all of that.
Janet, for sure.
Absolutely, because I know it's, and honest to goodness, it's harder probably on her than it is on Lewis. I mean, that's just the truth, that's the way it works. All right, anybody else? Anybody? No? All right, who wants to pray for us tonight? Anybody? Any volunteers? Anybody at all side? You got it? All right. Let's bow our heads, folks.
Yeah, Heavenly Father, we just come today, just thank you for the class today, we're gonna be on tonight. Pray that you watch over us as we go throughout the day, and you can just watch over everybody going on their days, God. We pray that you can help people see you through us, and you can shine your light through us, God.
Amen. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you next time.
She's been right in my shoulder.
I'm done. You got like 5 minutes.
And then